Welcome back, weather enthusiasts and history buffs. I am Hari, and sitting across from me, ready to unpack yet another wild atmospheric anomaly, is the always brilliant Kimi. How are you doing today, Kimi?
I am doing fantastic, Hari, and let me tell you, I have been looking forward to today's topic. We are diving into the 2003 Atlantic hurricane season. Specifically, we are looking at the eighth storm of that season, Tropical Storm Henri. It's a story of meteorological deception, really.
Meteorological deception is the perfect way to put it. At first glance, Henri seems like just a moderate tropical storm. It was one of 6 tropical cyclones to hit the United States that year. But if you only look at the Florida landfall, you miss the absolute chaos it caused later on. Let us start at the very beginning. Where was Henri born?
Henri's journey started way back on August 22, 2003, as a tropical wave moving off the western coast of Africa. It took its sweet time, trekking westward all the way across the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea without developing into anything significant. It was basically just a disorganized cluster of clouds enjoying a tropical vacation.
Right, it was completely unremarkable until September 1st, when the wave axis finally entered the Gulf of Mexico. The warm waters there acted like a double shot of espresso. The convection steadily organized around a low-level center of circulation. By September 3, while sitting about 300 miles west of Tampa, Florida, it officially developed into Tropical Depression 12.
And the steering currents were quite sluggish. Embedded within a slow mid-latitude trough, the depression meandered eastward. Now, here's where we get into some fascinating atmospheric physics. By September 5th, it strengthened into Tropical Storm Henri, reaching peak winds of 60 miles per hour. But Hari, it did this despite facing some seriously hostile conditions aloft.
Exactly. Henri was battling strong southwesterly vertical shear. Usually, shear like that just tears a tropical cyclone apart, decapitating the thunderstorms from the center of circulation. But Henri was stubborn. It kept intensifying, peaking later that same day. However, the shear eventually won the wrestling match. It greatly weakened the storm, downgrading it to a tropical depression before it even reached the coast.
It is a bit of a letdown if you're tracking a hurricane, but a massive relief for residents. Henri made landfall near Clearwater, Florida on September 6th, with maximum sustained winds of just 35 miles per hour. It zipped across the state, accelerating to the northeast. Forecasters actually thought it might re-intensify over the open waters of the Atlantic, expecting the shear to drop, but Henri failed to bounce back.
Instead, it degenerated into a remnant low-pressure area on September 8th off the coast of North Carolina. Due to a ridge of high pressure to its north acting like a brick wall, this broad, disorganized remnant low stalled and remained nearly stationary. Forecasters kept a very close eye on it, watching for potential redevelopment, but it eventually moved inland near Cape Hatteras on September 12th without reorganizing, ultimately dissipating over New England on September 17th.
Now let us talk about the preparations before it hit Florida, because even though it landed as a depression, folks were not taking it lightly. The National Hurricane Center issued a tropical storm warning from Englewood to Indian Pass. They did cancel it before landfall, but flood warnings were plastered across the state. They were predicting 5 to 10 inches of rain.
And the local governments jumped into action. 12 shelters were put on standby, and the Hurricane Shelter Information Hotline was prepped to activate within 10 minutes of notice. Over in Levy County, officials actually declared a state of emergency. They shipped sandbags and sand out to Cedar Key, Yankeetown, and Inglis, anticipating storm surge and coastal flooding. 3 western Florida counties even canceled evening school events on September 5.
Better safe than sorry always. The impacts in Florida were relatively minor in terms of massive destruction, but still highly disruptive. There were 2 reported injuries. One was in Lee County, where a man was struck by lightning from one of Henri's outer feeder bands. The other was a driver in Pinellas Park who hydroplaned and crashed on Interstate 275.
And let us not forget the tornado. An F0 tornado touched down on September 5 near Zoo, Miami. Fortunately, the winds along the west coast only gusted to about 29 miles per hour in a few spots. The surf was higher and tides ran about a foot above normal. But as forecasted, the real story in Florida was the water falling from the sky. The region had already seen above normal rainfall since August.
Henri just dumped on an already saturated sponge. 3 different locations recorded over 7 inches of rain, with the statewide peak hitting an impressive 9.09 inches in Hialeah. Both Fort Myers and the Sarasota-Bradenton International Airport broke daily rainfall records on September 5. And Hari, there's a very bizarre, lesser-known fact about the flooding in Punta Gorda.
Oh, I know exactly what you were going to mention. The street flooding was so bad there that when people drove their cars through the flooded roads, the wake from their vehicles actually pushed the water over the thresholds and straight into people's houses. Imagine sitting in your living room and your carpet gets flooded because an SUV drove past your lawn too fast. It is both tragic and a little absurd. That bizarre flooding contributed to an estimated $120,000 in damage in Florida. In Inglewood, the flooding was severe enough to displace residents, forcing the American Red Cross to open a temporary shelter. Meanwhile, in Hernando County, one stationary thunderstorm dropped over 5 inches of rain in just an hour. Roads flooded rapidly, though the water receded quickly, and damage was minor since it was sparsely populated.
Before we move up the coast, we should mention Henri's outer reach. The Bahamas caught some of the outer rain bands, receiving about an inch of rain and 32-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Up in Bermuda, moisture from Henri brought 2.44 inches of rain to the airport. That does not sound like much, but it hit just days after the devastating Hurricane Fabian, severely hindering their cleanup efforts.
Right, a terrible case of bad timing for Bermuda. But now, RG, we have to transition to the mid-Atlantic. This is where Henri pulled off the ultimate hold-my-beer moment for a remnant low. A storm that barely scraped together $120,000 in damage in Florida went on to cause absolute devastation up north.
It really is the plot twist of the episode. As the remnants drifted north, they dropped 1 to 3 inches across North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland. Fun fact for Baltimore, that rain actually ended a 7-day dry period. It was their longest stretch without precipitation since October 2002. But the silver linings end there because then the storm parked itself over Delaware.
And parked is the operative word. In northern Delaware, NEXRAD weather radars estimated that over 10 inches of rain fell in a mere 5-hour period. Think about that volume of water. The highest official rain gauge reading was 9.02 inches in Hockessin. The Red Clay Creek simply could not handle it, leading to record flow rates exceeding 32,000 cubic feet per second near Wooddale.
To put that in perspective, officials described this as a 1-in-500-year flood event. The creek crested at 17.27 feet. That is nearly 12 feet above its flood stage. The Glenville area, which is now largely abandoned because of this, was completely submerged. 194 houses were damaged. Residents were forced to evacuate to a nearby elementary school. Some people were trapped in inundated cars, and one person literally had to be rescued from their house by a helicopter.
A helicopter rescue for a storm that lost its name days prior. It is wild. The cultural and historical damage in Delaware was also heartbreaking. The raging waters of the Red Clay Creek entirely washed away the historic Wooddale Covered Bridge and severely damaged the Ashland Covered Bridge. The Wilmington and Western Railroad lost 6 bridges, with 8 miles of track washed out or damaged, totaling $5.9 million just for the railroad. And Greenbank Mill, a historic grist mill complex, suffered $450,000 in damage. One business along the White Clay Creek sustained millions in damages after the floodwaters breached the building. Overall, the state of Delaware took a $16.1 million hit. But Henri was not done. The heavy rainfall extended right into eastern Pennsylvania.
That is right. Downingtown, Pennsylvania was slammed with 8.75 inches of rain. Multiple rivers breached their flood stages, triggering flash floods that required hundreds of emergency rescues. In Avondale, 250 people had to be evacuated from a single apartment building. In Kennett Square, another 50 people were rescued directly from their cars and front porches.
The infrastructure damage in Pennsylvania was staggering. 12 homes were completely destroyed, and another 360 were damaged. The flooding downed trees, which wiped out power for about 109,000 people. 22 bridges were damaged, and 2 of them had to be closed indefinitely. Major roads were totally impassable, including a portion of U.S. Route 1 in Chadds Ford. Total damage in Pennsylvania reached $3.54 million.
As the remnants finally limped further north, they dropped a couple more inches in New York and Connecticut before dissipating completely on September 17. But the aftermath was just beginning. The destruction in the Mid-Atlantic required immediate federal intervention. On September 23, President George W. Bush declared Newcastle County, Delaware, a disaster area.
That declaration was crucial. It opened up federal grants for temporary housing, home repairs, and allowed federal funding to cover 75% of the costs to replace public facilities. On September 26th, Chester County, Pennsylvania received the same disaster declaration. Keep in mind, this area was also hit by Hurricane Isabel shortly after Henri, adding insult to injury.
The recovery effort was massive. Within 2 months, 659 Delaware residents applied for FEMA aid, receiving over $1 million. 141 small businesses took out loans totaling around $2.5 million. And volunteer organizations did tremendous work, hauling out more than 300 tons of ruined appliances and furniture to local landfills.
One of the most fascinating long-term responses was the mitigation effort in Glenville. Because the flooding was so catastrophic, the state and county governments actually purchased 171 homes in the area. They relocated the residents and intentionally returned the land to a wetland to mitigate future flooding. It was the highest number of homes ever purchased in the state for storm damage mitigation. It is a smart, albeit painful, strategy. You cannot fight the river. You have to give it room to flow. The rebuilding took years. Newcastle County finished debris cleanup in the Red Clay Creek in 2005. The Wilmington and Western Railroad did not reopen until June 2007. And that beautiful Wooddale-covered bridge, it was finally rebuilt and reopened in December 2008, intelligently constructed 5 feet higher than before.
An incredible story of resilience after a storm that truly defied expectations. Henri proved that a cyclone's legacy isn't always defined by its wind speed at landfall, but sometimes by the sheer volume of water it carries long after it loses its tropical characteristics. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into meteorological history. We hope you learned something new today.
Stay safe, stay curious, and keep your eyes on the skies. We will catch you on the next episode with another fascinating journey into the past. Goodbye, everyone.
This episode is based on the Wikipedia article Tropical Storm Henri 2003, which is available under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license. This podcast was crafted using artificial intelligence.